Thank you, everybody who is here, who's giving service. And just by being here, I believe that we are giving service when we show up for meetings regularly. And that's something that I've always felt very strongly about. So let me introduce myself. My name is Lisa J. I am a recovering codependent. Very grateful to be here with all of you. I am the coming off the bench to help out. We had our speaker unable to attend as of last night, and so please forgive if it seems a little not as polished as it could be, but I am not a professional, so we'll definitely hang my hat on that. I would like to share my screen with you, so if you'll give me a moment to do that. There we go. Okay, tradition 9 and step 9. I decided to start with tradition 9 today. Typically, people don't have as many questions and as many thoughts about tradition 9, but it's step 9 when it comes to making amends. There can be a lot going on there. So my lay of the land, how I plan to present today, is to speak briefly on tradition 9 and share some of my own experience, and then open it up for all of you to share. We'll go for a break, and then after the break, I will share some information and my own personal experience around step 9, and then open it up for question and answer and sharing time in that order. First questions and answers, and then sharing time, because I found that many people have a lot of questions about step 9, what it is, what it isn't, and I'd like to allow for as much time as possible for that. So with that, you see who I am, Lisa J. You can email me at lisabcoda@gmail.com. If you have any questions, that email will show up again at the end. So let me tell you just a brief bit about me. I joined CODA on March 16th, 1989. I have a sponsor. I sponsor. And I have a home group that I attend every Sunday morning. The Courage to Change group usually meets face-to-face in Naperville. Since the pandemic, we're meeting hybrid. Some of us are face-to-face, some of us are still meeting by Zoom. I wanted to show y'all that I referenced a lot of CODA literature for this topic. And so I just wanted to, instead of having to throw references on every single slide, just wanted to let you know I referenced several of our pieces of literature, whether they were books, pamphlets, booklets. Tradition 9. CODA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. For people who are relatively new to CODA, it can seem kind of odd. In fact, if you're one of those kind of codependents who was born organized, you might have this to say. I find your lack of organization disturbing. And for some people it is. And for some people, they really appreciate what they might consider a very loosely organized affiliation, almost to the point of no structure. So what I found in CODA is that we tend to be a group of people who live in the extremes. So there can be the people who desire rigid control, and there can be people who want none. And actually what we're shooting for is kind of some balance. So what does it mean to never be organized? Never be organized, according to our literature, states there's no hierarchy. There's no like, we got this person, this person, this person, there's this person at the top. There's no one individual who is an authority. There are no rules. We are guided by the principles of our steps, traditions, concepts, but there are no rules. And because there are no rules, there is no organization needed to enforce rules. Structure is important. Why do we need structure? CODA has a service structure chart, and some of you may have seen this before and some haven't. In other fellowships, they show it more like an inverted pyramid. But the idea here is that we don't have organization, but we have structure. And one of our booklets tells us why. And I'd like to read it. We have clear, orderly direction pertaining to the necessary tasks that help to assure the continuation of CODA. So as an example, it may be difficult to see this, and I do apologize for that because it's a pretty intense graphic. But at the top of the pyramid is the home group. or our groups. And then we have intergroups, and we have voting entities, which would be considered area or regions. We have an annual event called our CODA Service Conference. And when the CODA Service Conference is in session, it is actually all of those groups above the service conference that are actually in charge. But when the service conference is not in session, when I say in charge, they're the ones who are making decisions. When the service conference is not in session, it is the service committees, the CODA Board of Trustees, and our core board, which is our publishing arm. They are looking over the assets of CODA. But if we didn't have this structure chart, there could be an understanding that maybe it's the home groups who are in charge, or maybe it's a regional area that's in charge of these things. And so I wanted to show this to give an example of structure rather than organization. This tells us how the work gets done. And the whole idea here is that there is equality and participation from all, and the ability for everybody to participate in that. And so with that, rotation of service. Some of you may be familiar with this concept, some may not. And so rotation of service is a way that we support Tradition 9 at the local, regional, and world level of CODA. Why have rotation of service? In fact, what is rotation of service? Rotation of service is where we have service positions that, such as the chair of a committee, or maybe somebody who leads a meeting, or who is the treasurer, or who is the literature person. On our board of trustees, our trustees are only permitted to serve on that board for an X number of times. And so twice for 3-year stints each for the CODA board. And the core board is a little different. I don't know all of their rules, guidelines, excuse me. But the idea here is that there's a rotation of service, because what we're trying to do is to prevent dominating and controlling behavior. We're trying to prevent one person from being in charge for a really long time. I don't know if y'all have ever experienced this before, but in my previous life, when I was attending CODA meetings in another area, I discovered that there was a meeting and the woman had been the chair for the entire time, like maybe 4 or 5 years. And nobody else was ever the chair. And in fact, they had a step study that met before that meeting. And it was when it was time for people to do their 5th step, which is to share their inventory, she took people to a room, each person, and heard their 5th step. It was a little on the controlling and dominating side, and it wasn't what was intended to happen. There was no room for the group conscience process. There was no room for the group to meet its needs in the way that it needed to. There was only one person making those decisions. And so we find that for maximum flexibility, it is important for there to be a rotation of service. It provides freedom for each group to meet its own needs in the way that it feels it's best through the group conscience process. It allows the group conscience process to work. There is equality. Every member has a voice and is encouraged to use it. So that kind of goes together with equality and voice. And remember that the group conscience process, as described in Tradition 2, is an expression of our higher power's will, our collective higher power's will. It's not the Lisa show or the Buttercup show. It is higher power's show. And the way that happens is through the group conscience process. Helps us to keep an open mind, that flexibility. You know, I may think that I'm the only one that knows how to do that job. Not true, but just kind of playing the game here. And I don't allow room for somebody else to come along and grow, for somebody else to come along and say, hey, maybe I might like to do that. Or maybe I have the idea that there's no way in hell I could ever do that job. And higher power taps me and says, hey, you're on, you're going to learn how to do this. And I've had that happen many times in my service. So it really does help us to keep an open mind, and it keeps the opportunities to serve available to everyone. Key concepts for Tradition 9. Concepts of flexibility. Leadership and service positions are fluid. They are not meant to be stagnant and only belong to 1 or 2 people. I don't know if y'all have ever heard this one either, but there's that idea, well, we've always done it this way and we're not going to do it any different way because it's always been done this way. Well, you know, I'll tell you what happens. As a person who's older now, because I've been in program for a while, it leaves no room for young people. And it leaves no room for new people coming in with fresh ideas. and fresh concepts and perspectives. We need this kind of change in CODA and in our personal relationships as well. How many of you have been kind of stuck in the, well, you know, I'm always the one who brings the casserole for the holiday, or I'm always the one who has to arrange the holiday for everybody. I've met people who have been pigeonholed this way, and they've been stuck in this role. This concept of Tradition 9 allows for flexibility. It allows for that other people to have that opportunity as well. There's also a responsibility that comes with Tradition 9. The responsibility that we can trust the authority of the group conscience process as an expression of higher power's will. And it allows us to let go of personal agendas. And if you've ever been at a business meeting, and if you've been doing this for a little while, there are some people who come in with personal agendas, and it can be really tough to let that go for a variety of reasons, usually our history. But these are key concepts that go with Tradition 9, flexibility and responsibility. I purposely kept this short. I didn't want to spend a lot of time because I really wanted to hear from the rest of you, either your thoughts or your experiences with Tradition 9. We're asking that we keep the shares to about 3 minutes or less. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you. If you would like to share, I think y'all know how to raise your hands in the chat box, or in your box, excuse me, or if you have a question or a share that you are having trouble unmuting or whatever, I think you can pop it in the chat and we can help you with that. So I'm going to open it up to all of you for shares. Thank you. You know, the traditions were designed for the group. So if you think about the steps were for the individual to help us overcome whatever ism we were dealing with. The traditions were designed for the group because back in the day for AA, they were about to go under because they had so many darn rules that nobody could possibly ever live up to all of them. And so they designed the traditions, I believe, higher power inspired, to help the group survive. And in turn, CODA now has a booklet called the 12-Piece Relationship Toolkit, which is designed to take those traditions and apply them to personal relationships. And I have to tell you that my husband and I, when we first started our relationship, we did the 12-Piece Relationship Toolkit, which means we took these principles of the traditions and applied them to our newly forming relationship. And we found that it really allowed us to better our communication, level a lot of expectations that we might have had we not been talking about things, look at our personal histories and look at, okay, what areas are, in his terms, soft spots or you know, trigger points. For me, they're hot buttons sometimes. At work, I've used the traditions at work, though not everybody else is using them. I am. I recognize that, you know, we're all there for the same reason. If the company does well, we make money and then we get paid and we can do the things that we want and need to do. And so instead of getting pissed off because somebody makes a mistake or maybe doesn't, at least in the beginning, if it's a repeat offender, then that's another issue. But, you know, in general, I come at it with, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about what's going on. Let's not automatically assume that they're trying to harm. Let's look at it as maybe they need some information. Maybe they need some coaching. Maybe they need a reminder that there are consequences for poor choices if they keep making the same poor choice over and over again. So I have found not only has it improved my service relationship, so even on our committee, when we abide by the traditions, everybody has a chance to be heard. Nobody gets shut down. I don't know about you guys, but in growing up, we had family meetings that were a joke because you know who was talking? My dad. Do you know who wasn't talking? The rest of us, because he wasn't really interested in hearing what we had to say. So it was huge for me to come into CODA service, and to find out that not only did we have these business meetings, but we were actually encouraged to share, and people wanted to hear what everybody had to say. And then I had to learn what it was like to not have things go my way. That was a little bit of an ego buster, but in a good way, because it reminded me that it wasn't about me or my agenda. It was ultimately about what higher power's will was for the group. So it's been an amazing experience. And I've also watched groups come back around after floundering. I've seen inner groups almost shut down, take these principles of the traditions, do a group inventory using these principles, and turn it around into something really beautiful, functional, healthy, and truly serving the community. It's been phenomenal. Sometimes I think the traditions are the yogurt of the 12-step recovery. A lot of people kind of go, ugh, why? But they are important. And like I said, it's kind of the yogurt, it's kind of the, people kind of turn a nose up at it and just kind of, that's not really for me. So I'll be honest with you that when I came into CODA, we didn't have all the magnificent literature that we have right now. So we were relying on whatever we could get our hands on, including other fellowships literature. And so really, I started learning about the traditions when I got sober, because 3 months later I got sober because I found out it was really hard to work a 12-step program and drink alcoholically. And so when I started doing service, not only for CODA, but for some of my AA fellowship and others, that's when I really got an opportunity to see the traditions in action. And that was really my first introduction to them, was joining a service commitment or a service committee of some sort and watching it take place, watching people practice the group conscience process, watching unity take place, watching what it meant to not be organized, but to have the structure that we're talking about. Many of these things happened, and here's a big one: anonymity, confidentiality. All of those things were actually demonstrated. And so I know that in our green workbook that we have, it goes step, tradition, step, tradition, step, tradition. My personal experience is that if y'all had made me look at the traditions right after a step, I wouldn't have got it. It would have been like speaking another language to me that I didn't understand. So for me personally, I found that going through the steps first was great. And then coming back around and say, okay, let's take a walk through the traditions. Let's talk about what that looks like. And I found that to work really well with men and women that I sponsor. And it seems to make a little more sense. Somebody kept telling me about the long form of the traditions. And I'm like, what are they talking about? Well, we used to have a one-page pamphlet that had the tradition and then like maybe 2 or 3 sentences at most, kind of describing a little more about what I think that may be what you're referring to. I'm not sure. But somebody somewhere else kept calling it the long form. And I finally put it together and figured out what they were talking about. Well, CODA had stopped printing that. And it was really sad because it's actually a wonderful piece of literature and it gives a really good brief overview of each tradition. So I'm in favor of something like that being read at each meeting. I'm not sure. I think that would be up to the meeting itself, as always, and if they felt like that's what they needed, great. I know there are some meetings that there are so many people in the meeting. Reading less is what they're looking for, so there's more time for shares. So my concern is that we take so much time reading so much stuff at the beginning of meetings that sometimes we can get lost in wanting to make sure that everything's very perfectly well explained, and we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to get it. So I think that there's a balance, and I am a firm believer in the group conscience process. I'm open, whatever higher power wants. Yeah, I know when I came into recovery, I didn't know how to have fun. I'd lost sense of what that looked like, and real fun versus, the not so fun that I thought was fun. Okay, we are moving on to step 9. May direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, when I first saw step 9, I wasn't sure that would be possible. And there were a lot of reasons, most of them fear-based. And so one of the goals I had for today, and I'm hoping that will happen, is that this will be an opportunity to share a little bit of information from our literature, share some of my personal experience with step 9, and then open it up for all of you to either ask questions or to share your own step 9 experiences. I find that for myself, when I hear what other people have experienced, it can help relieve some of the fear of the unknown. It can give me some strategies for dealing with maybe some of those more challenging amends that might be hanging out there. And it can also help me know what to do when things don't go well, because sometimes that does happen in life. Because just because I got in recovery doesn't mean everybody else came along for the ride and agreed and decided that they were going to start acting right. What is an amends? For many people, for many people, typically an amends look like this. I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry if, and then fill in the blank. And many years ago, there was a quote that I heard that made a lot of sense to me. And it says, you know what? I got a closet full of I'm sorry's. Words are cheap. You know, I need to see action. I need to see somebody making changes. And I actually had the father of my two older boys was that person. He would say, I'm sorry all the time, but nothing changed. And so for me, an amend was more than saying I'm sorry. An amend was more about acknowledgement of what we did, so myself as a recovering codependent, and how it impacted the other person. It included a change in behavior. For me, it wasn't enough to say, you know, I'm sorry that I wasn't really good at telling the truth all the time. I needed to make a change in behavior. It wasn't enough to just keep saying I was sorry. And a question that we can ask ourselves is, how would we like amends to be made to us? And I find that that has really assisted me both personally and as a sponsor when I have someone come to me who's on this step and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I should do. I said, well, how would you want someone to treat you? How would you want someone to make amends to you? And it completely turns the table and makes it, oh, well, I would want someone to acknowledge and I'd want someone to hear what I had to say. And these things can be very important to identifying what an amends is. Who do we owe amends to? Well, our literature tells us that typically many of us owe amends to our higher power. I know I did. For quite some time, I denied the existence of any type of spiritual being. And I realized that there are many people that don't have a higher power and they still work this program, and I respect that 100%. For me, to deny the existence of a higher power was denying something that was foundational for myself. And so in turn, it was important for me to make amends to that higher power, not only for denying my higher power's existence, but there have been times along the way when I knew what my higher power wanted me to do, and I'm like, no, too hard. I'm going to go do it my way. I'll let you know how it turns out. And always I'm coming back somewhere between tail between the legs and groveling, going, oh my God, why didn't I listen to you? You know, making amends to ourselves. Now, for me, when I am in my other program, you don't put yourself on the list, and you certainly don't put yourself at the top of the list. But in CODA, I appreciate looking at this differently, because I have to tell you that the one I hurt the most when I was out there running and gunning was myself. Yes, I impacted other people, and yes, I hurt other people, but I have to tell you, I hurt myself far worse than I did anybody else. I threw in some other ideas of who we could owe amends to: family, lovers, spouses, children, friends, coworkers, anyone who has been hurt by our actions could be, and please hear me clearly, could be, I'm going to say it again, could be a candidate for an amends. Hold on to that thought. More about that in a minute. Here's another one. What is a direct amends? Because it says very clearly direct amends. It doesn't just say we make amends. We make direct amends. So a direct amends is usually face-to-face. We don't get to opt out of an amends because we're afraid to face the other person and afraid to face what they may have to say, or we're afraid to hear what they, how they felt and how it impacted them. There are alternatives available because sometimes direct amends are not available. And an alternative can be writing a letter to someone if that person is deceased, or in my case, there are a couple people that I've been waiting years to find and I haven't found them. Social media and other forms of, media have made it easier to find people, but there's still people that aren't found for whatever reasons. And so I have found that there are alternatives. Another one is visualization and doing mirror work. When I needed to make amends to myself, I got to do a twofer. I got to write it and then read it to myself in the mirror. Yeah. And it's powerful and not to be missed. Not to be missed. And in fact, when I've done direct amends to myself, there have been times, since I'm a little more mature now, read older, I have written amends to myself at different ages, because I found that the woman that I was at 30 was different than the one at 40, then different at the one at 50. And so I have found that writing to the woman at that age and at that level of experience and knowledge and understanding was important to my healing, and was important to forgiveness and acceptance and not hating myself and not wanting to cut myself off from a part of myself that was really important to who I am today. Except when to do so would injure them or others. What exactly does that mean? Well, when I first got into recovery, it was literally, not figuratively, but literally them or others. So it had nothing to do with me. Eventually, as I got further along in my CODA recovery, I recognized that I needed to be able to be on that list too, because there are times when going to make an amends, a direct amends to somebody, could put me in danger. And danger could look a lot of different ways. So one thing we look at is legal issues. There are times when there is a legal order forbidding someone to go to that person and have any direct contact. So in the US, it's usually called a restraining order or an order of protection. I don't know what there is available in other countries. But if there is a legal order of that nature, it is not appropriate, because either it's going to go really bad for the person you're trying to go and make amends to, or it's going to go bad for you because you're going to get arrested. So legal issues falls into this category. We do not make direct amends when there are legal issues. If somebody has asked you to stay away, there are some people that don't have the legal piece, but they have the, hey, leave me alone. This can be very challenging for some people because, they want to do it right and they have to do it perfect. And it says to make direct amends. I get that. Hold that thought for a second as well. Physical safety. Going to make amends with somebody that has maybe caused us physical harm. Many of us, men and women, have been harmed physically by somebody that we owe an amends to. That doesn't make it okay that we're going to go walk over and make amends because, suddenly, hey, we're in recovery, we're going to go make amends. That can leave us in a really horrible position. So their safety and ours, physical safety, is of utmost importance. This is what I want to emphasize the most, and you will hear it more than once from me today. Always, always, always talk with a sponsor, therapist, or trusted CODA friend before making amends to anyone. And here's my story. So I did my 4-step inventory. I went and shared it with my sponsor, blazed through steps 6 and 7. It was time to make my list for step 8 and rush off to do step 9. And so I walked in with this list, and it was a long list for a woman who was 26 years old. I really thought everything was my fault. And I watched my sponsor do this. She'd go, yes, no, 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 yes, no, 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 yes, yes, no, no. More than half the people were off my list. And I needed that. I needed that perspective. The other thing that I think is important is how I approach the amends. So my very first amends that I made was with a coworker. It was, I would call it low-hanging fruit. It was somebody that was easy for me to make amends with. I had the opportunity to kind of talk it over with my sponsor first. I called this girl up. I went to meet her, made the amends, went great. I was like, yes, I've got this. So then it was time to make amends with my first husband. And of all the relationships in my life, he suffered the most from my codependency. And so, in my enthusiasm of having done so well, I didn't talk to anybody before I went and made this one. And I just went, bleh, and I just blurted all this stuff and said, this is why I'm a mess. And this is why everything went so bad. And it went horribly bad. He didn't want to hear anything I had to say. He thought it was all bullshit and pretty much hung up on me. And I remember being a bit deflated and a little chagrined and going, this is why we check with somebody first before we do this. And this is why, because it is important that I'm not trying to assuage my guilt at the expense of others, that I'm not trying to make myself feel better by dumping on somebody else. And I often encourage the men and women that I work with to speak with me first. Let's talk about how it's going to look. Let's talk about the where, the when. Trying to go up to your husband and make amends to him while he's watching his favorite show or favorite team playing, really bad idea, not good timing. I remember when I needed to make amends to my ex-husband, and we left the house because I knew I couldn't get him away from the damn TV. So I said, can we go have ice cream? So I took him out for ice cream, and we sat in this cute little ice cream parlor, and I made amends to him. And I acknowledged what I did wrong. And I told him, not only did I acknowledge what I did wrong, but I acknowledged what the message was and what it communicated to him. And he was able to hear it because he didn't have the distractions that he would normally have. So I think that I have found it extremely valuable to check with someone first before you rush off to make amends whenever possible. There are times when it's not going to be possible to commune with somebody, to communicate with somebody like a sponsor, therapist, or trusted friend. So who's always there no matter what? Higher power. And if you don't believe in higher power, I respect that. Go for the goodness of the universe, the best that mankind has to offer, humankind has to offer, the highest good, whatever it is, to really consider what that would look like. But whenever possible, I am a firm advocate of speaking with someone first. I've experienced this too many times to go light on this one. What is a living amends? Have any of you heard of a living amends? Can I just kind of get a show of, if you just kind of, like that, I'll just kind of wave through. Yeah, some people will know what that is and some people won't. The first time I heard it, I went, what? Like, what the hell? But here's what I understand a living amends to be. And this is, again, my own personal experience, and I think I may have pulled some of this from our literature as well. When making direct amends would harm the other person, for example, due to promiscuity, adultery, abuse, sexual abuse, etc., making a living amends can be a very viable option. What does a living amends look like? I would like to use an example from my own life, from my history. Not only did I have an issue with lying, which I dealt with very early in my recovery, the other one I dealt with was sleeping with other women's husbands. And somehow I made that okay for a really long time. And when I got into recovery in my first early days, I did it again. And I got involved with somebody else's husband. And she found out about me and called me and threatened me, quite understandably. And very shortly after that, I never saw him again. That was due to circumstances that were outside my control. Thank you, higher power. Earthquakes are amazing things to separate people and make them not ever see each other again. But when it came time for me to do my step work and work on amends, she came up for me. And I did the reading and I talked with my sponsor and I talked with other people. And if I was to go and make amends to her for what I did, there are several things that I could have been doing potentially, hurting her by bringing up an old thing that maybe her and her husband had already worked out. She threatened to kill me, understandably, so I'm suddenly not safe. And my reasons for doing it would have been to make myself feel better, because any step that I made toward that would be harmful to her. And so I made a decision at that moment that I would not sleep with other people's husbands anymore, and I have not. I'm really happy about that. And it's more than just happy, there's a joy, there's a sense of taking responsibility, which I believe is an esteeming thing. And so on a daily basis, I made this choice not to behave this way. And so when I found out that I was attracted to somebody that was married, done, you're off the list. That's a deal breaker immediately. No longer was that acceptable because I knew how painful it was. I knew how painful it was to just know that I hurt her. And then, of course, later I had my own experiences. Asking for higher power's highest good, whatever that looks like. In my case, it was very clear. I didn't sleep with other people's husbands anymore. Whatever that looks like, always seeking out what higher power would have us do when it's a living amends, when we're unsure. And of course, again, checking with somebody if we're unsure. We don't get to use the living amends to avoid making direct amends when it is appropriate. So I really want to throw that out there as well, because fear can be a dominating force when it comes to this step. You know, making the list wasn't so horrible. Like, okay, I can get you all on paper. Ooh, now it's time for action. I'm afraid. But we can couch it, and I say we, I'll speak for myself. I/men and women that I've talked with over the years can couch this and really frame it, and we can spin it and make it into, well, you know, I'm not safe, or, you know, I'm not fill in the blank. This is why I believe, again, it's so important to check this out with somebody else. Again, sponsor, therapist, coda friend. If one is so inclined, you could even speak with clergy, whatever that may look like if you have a spiritual practice. Why do we make amends? There are some people that have the idea that I'm making amends to make them feel better, or so that it makes everything all better, or that it makes, they'll have an expectation that, oh, when I do this, then we're going to be friends again, and then everything's going to be okay. And if it's dangerous. It's dangerous to go in with expectations. So let's talk about some of the reasons why we make amends. I read something this morning, and it really spoke to me about what happens for me. Spiritual clutter. If I'm carrying around an amends that I need to make and I'm not making it, it becomes clutter, much like one might have in their home. And so I might have this piece of clutter that just gets stuck somewhere, and then maybe it's on the floor and I'm stepping over it, or maybe it's on a table and I keep pushing it aside, and it gets in the way. And what I found is that when I stall on my amends, so I had one that I stalled on with one of my sons, and I found that it made it difficult to talk with him. It made it difficult for me to reach out to him. I felt a barrier. And then in turn, I started to feel a barrier between me and God. And it becomes kind of like that clouded window where I really don't have this sense that I'm connected with my higher power. And so making amends to clear the spiritual clutter, really important for me. I make amends for myself to clear my side of the street. I don't make amends so that, okay, if I say what I did wrong, then you're going to fess up to what you did, and then we're all good. Doesn't always work that way. And if I walk in with that expectation, I'm walking in halfway to a resentment, because not everybody is going to respond well when we go to make an amends. So I cannot go with the expectation that it's going to be rainbows and butterflies and they're going to love me and they're just going to, no, it's not why we do it. And if that's why you find yourself wanting to make amends, time to have that conversation again with, let me repeat, sponsor, therapist, trusted coda friend, or somebody else that you trust from a spiritual aspect. I also found that my relationship with my higher power was strengthened when I went and made these amends. And I have to tell you, when I made the amends with my son, it blew me away, because I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I was kind of on the fence, like, because he's not a touchy-feely guy. He's the kind of guy, get in, say what you got to say, get out. I can't do the, I feel this when you did that, and this is what none of that's too many words. I lost him at I feel, you know? So he's the kind of guy, I got to get in, say what I got to say, and get out. And I was able to say, succinctly, not too many words. He heard me. He shared with me what he'd been holding on to that happened that I wasn't even aware of. And I was able to acknowledge, you're right, son, that wasn't right that I did that. And I'm sorry that I don't remember. It was during a time when I was very sick. I have an autoimmune disease and my memory was very poor. But I told him, I believe you and I am sorry. And it's not how I live today, and it's not how I want to live today. And so because of that, my relationship with God was strengthened because I went in scared to death. I was shaking. I was like, pardon me, it was almost visible. But I walked out of that going, God, I could have never seen that going the way it did. He allowed me to hug him. He's not a hugger either, with me anyway. And I've noticed that he's been more open to speaking with me. We had a video chat the other day with his 2 young children. I was so excited. And he actually talked, and he actually asked me, like, how you doing? I'm like, oh. So this shit, it's amazing when it works. Regardless of how it goes, whether it goes well and it's accepted and there's a conversation, or if it doesn't go well and all I've come away with is I have cleaned my side of the street, there is a sense of satisfaction in taking responsibility for my part. Time check for self. Okay. And it's also esteemable, and it builds esteem in taking responsibility for those actions as well. How to do an amends. You might have heard me mention this, but I'm going to say it again. Plan. Talk with a sponsor, trusted code of friend, therapist, somebody else. Get some feedback. Get some guidance. Bookend. For those of you that don't know what bookending is, you talk to somebody before the event, you have the event, you talk to somebody after the event, you bookend. It can be a very powerful tool to help me, I'll speak for self, to follow through with an action knowing that there's somebody else who knows. Somebody else may be praying for me or just have me in their thoughts. That can be very powerful. I always recommend praying and releasing those fears, releasing whatever's coming up. And it may not just be fears. Sometimes I've had to make amends to somebody that I was resentful at. And in fact, it's a great motivator for me not to do stupid stuff, is I don't want to have to go make amends to him or to her. It's a wonderful motivator. I don't think it's the best motivator or super spiritual, but it works. Another thing I'll do is to visualize that I'm walking into the situation with my higher power with me. I find that to be really powerful. To imagine that my higher power is standing with me and not necessarily holding my hand per se, but just there, just knowing that my higher power is there. And the biggest thing I can say is 0 expectations, level them. Write them down on paper if you have them, release them however you release them, in a God box, a fire, toilet. I don't care how you let go of them, let them go, because they will interfere. And if I can share anything from my own experience, let go of the expectations. It will be a better experience for doing so. From our 12-step handbook, there is a very simple formula that they offer to acknowledge our harmful behavior and the other person's feelings in the matter. And what I would add to that is allowing them to express their feelings, because I may think I know something. So with my son, as an example, I went in thinking that I knew what upset him, but he said, no, Mom, I got why you did X, Y, and Z. Here's what I was upset about. Beautiful. Great reminder. Give them an opportunity to share what their thoughts and feelings are. And then to follow with a change in our own behavior. It must follow with change. Otherwise, it's not an amends. It's a I'm sorry, and I got a closet full. What if it doesn't go well, which I did allude to? Call someone. Please call somebody. Don't walk around carrying the negative energy of somebody rejecting your amends. I believe that in making that call, it can be an opportunity to affirm our positive action. It takes guts to go make amends to people because they're not all going to be low-hanging fruit. And in fact, my husband and I have both had sponsors that had us kind of divide them into groups, like the ABC group. You know, A was easy, B was meh, C was crap. oh my God, I'm going to have to go see them. Pray. Look to higher power. Look for the good. Look for you taking an opportunity, me taking an opportunity to be responsible and to acknowledge powerlessness. I am powerless what somebody else does with my amends. All I can do is come and bring it to them. Just as I'm powerless coming today and sharing this, I don't know who's going to get something and who isn't. I don't know if somebody's going to go, oh God, she's a nut. And there could be somebody who's going, wow, I'm powerless. All I can do is carry a message. And it's my message based on my experience and what my higher power guided me to share today. I'm powerless over how an amends goes. My higher power can guide me and say, hey, this is how you do it. This is what we do. And somebody can just thumb their nose and say, F off and be done. I can't control how it goes. All I can do is show up. And that is empowering. It's empowering. With that, I would like to turn it over to you all. So I am going to end screen sharing. In another fellowship, they talk about we are God's people. We do not grovel before anyone. And I think that as recovering codependents, I will speak for my brand of codependency. I tended to be one of those people who would be like call it an overachiever. Like, I'm going to make amends and then I'm going to ask how I can make it right. And then the other person is going to tap me trying to make it right because, they can, right? And so I would not recommend doing that in many situations. I think it would be an extraordinary situation to ask that question because there is the potential, if you're dealing with a person who is manipulative, who is, look, I had to make amends to people that I had resentments against for being mean and cruel and manipulative and trying to get whatever they could get out of me. And so I would not recommend that in very many situations. Possibly financial amends. There could be hey, what can I do to make this right? Within the limits of, okay, this is how much I didn't pay back or need to pay back. Maybe there's some interest that goes with it. But beyond that, that would be a conversation to have with somebody because the potential to turn into becoming groveling, and when does it end? And how do you know when it's enough? And who decides when it's enough can just go never ending. And yeah, so that would be my personal experience with that and how I would handle that with a sponsee. I think that it's a great reminder that not everybody is cut from the same cloth. We're not cookie cutter people and it's all going to be the same for us. Not having a sense of satisfaction for me could reveal that I have an expectation that I didn't realize, that I was really hoping, but maybe I didn't verbalize it, or maybe it was more on the subconscious rather than awareness, and it could reveal that for me. Because anytime we make the effort to clean up our side of the street as recovering people is a win. As imperfect as I am, and how many times have I messed things up? They didn't all go well. But I had to look at, what, I made an effort. And if it didn't match up with their expectations, I can't be responsible for that. And if I didn't have that warm, glowy feeling, I think that's okay too. If you have questions, I would love to hear about those. And I would like to ask that if you have an experience that you would like to share, would love to hear about it. So I wanted to say thank you. If you have any questions, please email me at lisabcoda@gmail.com. Thank you all so much. Mwah.